I'm out in the desert, and it's a nice evening. I took my time getting out here. I actually have someone who wants to rent the place next month, so I gotta tell my friend who's been staying here he's gonna have to find another place to be. But my mind's in deeper spaces at the moment. I don't know if it's a level of maturity, or maybe everyone that goes through their mid-40s and thinks the same way. There's a certain sadness I've experienced. It's not depression. It's just realizing all the relationships that came and went, including the ones I could have salvaged, but chose not to. There were things that pissed me off in the past, and I realize I shouldn't have been so hard-headed and thrown the hammer down so heavily when I could have been more forgiving of those who've offended me. These are the things I think about, out in the dark, in the desert, with no lights. I don't know how often I overthink things. I wonder how much of my lack of success is because I overthink ways things can fail. But that's where my mind goes. I've made a boatload of mistakes. We're all here on Earth just wanting to make things happen. And despite getting frustrated with others' failures and their offenses towards me, we're all just trying to get out from under whatever heavyweights we find ourselves under, proverbially. I had a beer with a new friend on the way out here. She was sort of on the way. Not sure how we ended up matching. We're about 50 miles apart, which isn't quite practical long term, but she was a good conversation. She seems to be excited about what I'm up to, and I don't seem to think that I would consider everything I'm up to terribly exciting. So I might say hi to her on the way back in a couple days. It's good to make friends. I did expect friendship out of her. She's a little too far to be dating long term. But anyway, that's how I spent my evening. And I was actually supposed to have a meeting with someone to talk about life, and I considered hypnotherapy, which I started a few weeks ago. I was supposed to have a session this evening, and I swapped out the time. I thought I was supposed to be at 7 this evening. So I failed, or I missed that call. I was basically a half hour late, so it's my own fault. It's not like I'm blaming anyone but myself. But I do wonder, when something like that happens, the only reason I'm mentioning such a thing is because I wonder, how much was that self-sabotage? This was to fix certain negativities that I've recognized in myself consciously. I've got repeated meetings with this hypnotherapist, and they're set up for 7 p.m. for the next 2 or 3 weeks. This particular session was at 4 p.m. So I'm kicking myself wondering, did I sabotage it? Or was I being lazy? I got a text warning, but it didn't occur to me that the warning was only an hour warning. I knew, or at least I thought, that visit was supposed to be at 7. So I only have communication through Zoom. So I'm going to have to call the company probably Monday. I don't know if they'll answer tomorrow. They might. But anyway, the only reason I'm talking about such a thing is because I wonder, was that self-sabotage? I don't consider myself as successful as I'd like to be. And I don't know how many of the relationships that have ended were because I got stuck in a negative way of thinking. I'd love to be able to crawl out from under my problems. I'm constantly wondering how to fix what I know isn't working. I'm always looking for new ways to improve. And if I make a mistake, I want to acknowledge it. It's actually a pretty noisy day, or a noisy evening. There's generators, which I expected, but lots of partying and lots of ATVs down the road. I enjoy my time alone. It's not loneliness. This downtime allows me to think and wonder, how do I get out from under my own weight? I catastrophize. That's what I've noticed. When you catastrophize all the possible failing points, I suppose that's part of trauma, or the result of. I don't know if that's a sort of PTSD. Have I suffered enough trauma to where I assume I'm going to experience the worst? Even if the very worst is I have to reschedule and pay for another appointment with a hypnotherapist? There's a certain amount of guilt there, and I question where that comes from. I'm not blaming anyone. Yeah, I got to pull $300 out of my butt. But there's a certain amount of guilt that's way beyond, well, I just have to reschedule. And that's going to be a couple $100 because of my own fault. Why do I catastrophize? Why do I feel such guilt over the most minor infractions in life? She still gets paid. She technically didn't get wasted time. I mean, at best, she was probably excited to have that interaction. I mean, no one genuinely wants to get paid for doing nothing. I've already had two successful sessions. This would have been my third tonight, so our next visit will be Friday. Hopefully she kept all her notes so we can just proceed, and then I'll throw on another visit at the end. I'll just have all my sessions shifted. And I do get the two recording. These sessions are recorded so I can listen to them as much as I want. So that's where I am. I'll just continue listening to my prior two sessions. Part of the change in today's happenings is that one of my customers delayed their work until Monday. So that means I had the whole day open up. So what do you think happened? I got excited and decided that let's take advantage of the downtime and do something with yourself. The last thing I want is to not be terribly successful and mope around and not have anything to do. So I jumped in the car, gathered a few things, and took off. I get so heavy-headed in my thoughts that when I got that text message about the meeting I was supposed to have, I didn't think to read the warning and realize it was actually in 1 hour, not 3 hours. I got it screwed up and thought 7 p.m. Now I was stuck on the road. I might have looked at it had I not been driving. But I wonder where my mind was other than either sabotage or was I just lost in thought? There's certain things I have to do, like when I close a door, I have to make a conscious effort and say it out loud that I closed the door. I don't know if that stems from living with dogs. I'm always paranoid that I'm going to leave the door open and then I'm going to be on the other end of town. And it's not necessarily a convenient situation to have to bother and shut the door. It's not really OCD in the traditional sense. It's paranoia and wondering if I close the damn door. It's because my mind is always digging deep into these very dark, not dark in a negative sense, but dark. Well, sometimes I think negative thoughts, but sometimes these thoughts are so deep that the menial stuff in life is hard for me to pinpoint, like closing doors. Maybe it's not so much a big deal when it's convenient to fix something like that, like if I actually did forget to shut a door because I'm in the house and it's not that big a deal to just go run over and shut the door. It's a totally different thing when you're in the car and you're miles away. And then you wonder if you've left that door swinging back and forth with a dog in the house. Or not in the house. Yeah, I suppose it wouldn't be such a huge deal if you didn't have to worry about keeping an animal safe. But yeah, I think the reason I felt like jumping online now, tonight, is because my mind is in a slightly depressive state. Not because I'm depressed, but because I'm realizing there is, it's depressing to recognize the lost relationships. And the reason life is so special is because it is temporary. They all start and they all end. Most of us don't have lifelong relationships. I mean, yeah, you might go 50 years with your parents, but ultimately, as long as you live a normal life, you're going to outlive them. Everything is temporary. Every relationship. And at my point in life, I'm considering all the temporary relationships that are no longer. I think I've been harder on people. Not necessarily that they deserved. I'm sure some of my heavy-handedness has been quite the lesson for them. If you turned out to offend me and I got you back, well, that might be a tough lesson to learn, but now I'm starting to wonder how much more energy that was and how many relationships I've lost because I was less forgiving or I was less tactful. It's almost like I set higher bars for certain failures of those who failed me. And maybe I should have just left that bar a little lower so that maybe they had a better chance. Years ago, when I hired a contractor who screwed me, there were attempts to fix that, and I literally didn't let it happen. Now, there's a myriad of ways that could have failed. I mean, I'm talking theory. I could have self-sabotaged it. It could have been that I was simply so disgusted that I didn't have the tact to interact with that jerk. And no one else around us that also wanted that to go well understood how foaming at the mouth I was. There's certainly more than one reason things haven't happened. I think I've taken life a little too seriously. Some of the failures or some of the lack of success is such because I wasn't quite as forgiving as I think I should have been. And when I recognize someone is insecure and they start shooting out either lies or not totally telling the truth, that's their insecurities talking. That's their own trauma. That's their own lack of maturity. And as much as I'm pissed off because they've screwed with either my reputation or they took something from me, I still feel like being the wise one, that I held a higher standard than they deserve to go against. I think at this point I should have been more gentle, even if they deserve to be stood up against. I use my downtime to figure out how to fix certain things. And these are relationships that are friendships or acquaintanceships, not romantic relationships. I haven't been directed that way in a while. People that have pissed me off for their own reasons, and I think I've taken offense in a more harsh way than necessary. It's essentially a summing up of what I've said a few times now. The question is what to do about it, other than calming down. Last year, the horn in my car stopped working. It's the only problem the car has now. Do you know how much I care about that horn? People cut me off all the time. I don't care. Now, I wonder how many times I would lean on that horn if it worked. I don't know, just in the last year, if because I don't have it to lean on, it's calmed me down, or if it's just a natural progression of maturing. I haven't had an urge to lean on that horn, despite getting people pulling in front of me. Not all the time, but on occasion, someone cuts in front of me. I'm not foaming at the mouth. I don't think I even have the urge to lean on the horn. But I mention it because I noticed the horn doesn't work one day. It was to the point where you eventually had to push harder and harder. I mean, at one point it worked fine, and then I noticed after a few hits I had to lean on it, and eventually I put all my weight into it, and it no longer made any noise. Now, this my little car, my little Toyota. It's always been a beach car. It's been its first 10 years in Hawaii, and it's been with me for the last 4 years at the beach. So I'm thinking there's some beach corrosion under there somewhere, and I'm told it's not the terribly easiest repair. But I don't drive like an idiot. And yeah, technically it's a safety feature, but my point is it's allowed me to recognize it. It hasn't necessarily calmed me down because I don't have it to lean on, but I've realized when people cut me off because they're bad drivers, I don't really have an urge to lean on it. There's so many people that have pissed me off and I still feel guilty. I wonder, when I say I feel guilty, it's because I've been mad at them. And I feel like I'm the grandpa. I feel like I've yelled at people unnecessarily. Maybe certain things need to happen. Life needs to be a little more difficult for people to calm down. I don't know if there's a way to be humble without life being difficult. I make mistakes every day. I question where my mind is when I do get angry. Again, I keep leaning on that contractor that screwed me. At the time, all I felt was disgust. All I wanted was him to feel how bad I was. And I kind of wonder, being the empath that I am, how much of that disgust was actually his. Was I taking on his disgust? Did he feel like a crappy person? Is that ultimately why he is what he is? Is he the sociopath or the narcissist that he is because of the traumas he's endured? At this point, it's frustrating because bad behavior is not something to just shrug your shoulders at, even if you understand that it's because of their own trauma. You have to put your foot down and have self-dignity. But you also want to be compassionate for the fact that they've probably lived a crappy life if they're screwing you out of your own opportunities because they're trying to dump dirt into a hole that's pitless. I've always had my health. I've got family that no longer does. I've had little experience, very little experience with loss. My first real experience, I had a friend that died when I was 21. I shed a tear over him. He left me his car. But I wasn't heartbroken. It was sad to know that I'll never see him in this life again. My next experience with loss was only 4 years ago with my dog. Recognizing that temporary stature is what makes life so memorable and valuable and interesting and fun. The sadness comes from the temporary that it is. If we were all vampires and lived indefinitely, life would be less interesting, less valuable, less insightful. Life is a school, and the older I get, specifically in the very recent past or leading up to today, I've had a lot of compassion that I might not have decades ago for those I share space with. It's hard for me to get angry. Getting frustrated is a different experience, but I don't think I get angry very easy. When I recognize someone is lacking maturity, I fundamentally realize it's a lack of love in the home they were brought up in. That sounds sappy, but a lot of our limitations aren't necessarily sheer IQ, but I do think that our IQ is part of it. I know people that have, I don't think, put their best foot forward. And it's frustrating to see two people match up together and hit a wall as far as success goes, because I'm watching them make mistakes I don't think I would have made. Does that make me more mature? I think at this point, all it does is make me more compassionate and realizing we're all here on Earth trying to find our own way. And despite people pissing me off, I can even find compassion for them. And I don't think most people are genuine assholes just because they want to be assholes. Years ago, I heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people. I don't know how much that is true, but I think that is a big part of it. Whether you become a sociopath or a narcissist or a psychopath, we get there for a reason. And I think it's the damage we experience growing up. It's a lack of love. It's a too much love. Is it a lack of understanding of others? Is it a lower IQ? I think it's a combination of all of it. But it comes back to me. What do I do with my lack of success? And the relationships I helped to end sooner than maybe they could have. What would life be if we all knew exactly how long we were going to live? Better yet, what if we all lived to the age of 80? What if we all knew 80 was it? We had that definite number. Getting hit by a truck was to end us sooner. We would otherwise make it to 80. Would make life a little less interesting, huh? Imagine that. At some point in childhood, you find out you've only got 80 years. Now, obviously, some of us go over 100. Many of us don't make it anywhere near that. but it's the randomness of life. It's the infinite number of variables life has to offer that makes life worth living. What am I supposed to do when I feel stuck? One thing I've noticed is that when I do think a negative thought, I hesitate purposely and analyze my thoughts. Not in the over-analytical way I described earlier, but if I've got a gut in my feeling, make a conscious effort of what I'm thinking. Am I pissed off at an obvious thought, or is there an underlying thought that is pissing me off? Hesitation can be a good thing. Obviously, when you're trying to make quick decisions, you need to be able to make good, quick decisions. But I don't think most of what life has to offer means that most of our decisions are meant to be made in haste. We need to take our time and think about the potentials. If I make this decision, what happens in the future? Or not? What doesn't happen in the future? If I terminate this interaction with someone, is their loss worth it? That's something I've thought about in the past with employers. When an employee makes a mistake, if it's a genuine mistake, is it worth firing them for? Obviously, if they have a character flaw and they're stealing, that's probably a non-negotiable. You probably don't want them around. It's not something they can be taught not to do. They clearly didn't mature beyond thievery in their childhood. But to my point, if someone makes a genuine mistake, is the company more valuable with or without that employee? Is that mistake worth so much that the chances of it happening again, are they greater or less? It's probably a good chance, if it's just a genuine mistake, that if you keep them around, that mistake's not going to happen. And suddenly your team is stronger because we all know the mistake happened. Hopefully, if they're smart and everyone is mature enough to recognize what actually happened and no one throws the blame in another direction, then it's worthy of keeping that employee around. We all make mistakes. When it comes to questioning whether or not someone's worthy of firing, that's how I would think. Did this employee learn their lesson? And are they a liability to keep around? If they've got an ethics issue, they're probably worth firing. For me, I'm questioning all that catastrophizing, all those negative thoughts about, did I make a mistake? I got an email from a customer I didn't quite finish up with. I thought I was done. They just sent me an email 4 or 5 hours ago. I just now read it. I didn't do anything wrong, but there's a little bit of guilt about not reading that email 3.5 hours ago. I don't know if that's part of that catastrophizing I'm mentioning. I did nothing wrong. I knocked it out of the park. I did an excellent job, but they still have complaints. Not about me, not about my competency, but they still have technical issues. Now that catastrophizing, that's a me problem, not a them problem. What's with that icky feeling I get when I forget or choose not to read my mail for 4 or 5 hours? Am I irresponsible? Did I blow them off? There's an icky feeling, and I don't know how else to describe it. How do I make myself bigger and stronger and know that when someone else has a problem, it is a them problem? Yeah, just before I started this video, I noticed that email. I thought it was from a friend because her name is sort of similar, but no, it's a customer I dealt with a month ago. I guess their email's still broken. Yeah, I know Outlook had a serious issue last week, or Microsoft had an issue where their network went down. I think so did Amazon. I think 2 or 3 major internet outages happened in the last 2 or 3 months. But anyway, Outlook was down several days ago, maybe a week ago. I don't know if that's part of what she's dealing with, but she says she's missing email or they're getting deleted. Sounds like she needs to upgrade her inbox, meaning she needs to pay a few more bucks a month to keep that box full enough to hold them all. But anyway, it's that people pleasing I'm referencing, isn't it? Why do I feel guilty about not being able to pull an answer out from between my toes in 5 minutes? I've made a ton of mistakes, but it's taken me a long time to realize they will only keep coming. We will never be complete human beings. We will always be flawed. We will always make mistakes. Some of us will get stuck maturing. We'll stop maturing because of our trauma that we refuse to work through. Maybe we don't have the intellect to understand it right now, but you probably will eventually. Sometimes you don't realize the trauma you experienced because you were in the thick of it. Maybe I think the way I do because it's taken me this long to process my own trauma. Whatever lackings I experienced, whatever direct trauma that I experienced, has only pushed me to where I am now, for better or worse. I've been through other trauma I have yet to talk about. I still don't know if I want to talk about it in a public forum. Things that have happened to me. I've processed a lot of it. Certainly not all of it. think I know how it happened, and I don't blame myself. Part of what happens when you let the wrong people into your life, because you're a good person, you see more of the positive than the negative. But putting your foot down and recognizing when you deserve self-dignity. Again, we're going back to the same guy that ripped me off. One of our friends tried to fix the problem. I didn't let that conversation ensue or happen. I'm not sure ensue is the proper word, but I didn't let that conversation happen because of how pissed I was. But anyway, that's beside the point. When I chose not to return, our friend that tried to fix us up fibbed about what actually happened and about why I chose not to come back. I even empathize for the fact that he was left embarrassed and he's lacking maturity. I chose not to come back. He says I'm not allowed back. He's embarrassed because I chose not to come back. And there's more than one narrative from him. First is, oh, Chris got in a fight and we haven't seen him in a while. And then, because I chose not to come back in a timely manner, this was more than 10 years ago at this point, but I still think about it. I chose not to come back, and they're left embarrassed. This was a bar fight that happened 10 years ago. I got backhanded. I responded. No one saw me get backhanded. And it was closing time. There was maybe 10 or 12 people there. They all saw me retaliate and smack him back. I literally grabbed him. I didn't hit him. So, the owner, because I didn't show up when he wanted me to, because what I did is I did show up 2 weeks later. Lots of time dilation, somewhere around 2 weeks. I came back in 2 weeks, and I was told by the bartender at the time that I was to have a conversation before I was allowed to be served again. Now, if you followed me, a handful of my videos, I have mentioned that I am physically disabled. It's a relatively minor disability, but you'd know it if you knew me. I was so pissed off that I should be expected to explain self-dignity. I have to use those words for everyone to understand where I was coming from. There's some underlying thoughts there. I do kind of wonder if I chose not to come back to piss everyone off. It wasn't so much that I was offended that I was expected to have a conversation with my physical disability, despite a camera that should have seen who threw the first hit. I used that as the excuse. But now I'm starting to think at this point, it's been a decade or more, did I just do that to piss everyone off? Those are the sorts of relationships I wonder if they were terminated when they didn't have to be. I don't know if I would call that passive-aggressive behavior, if that's where it was headed. I remember being disgusted And I talked to a few friends about how they were surprised that someone with a disability should be expected to explain themselves after getting backhanded. And that's a sort of high bar that I think I set that was too high. I was expecting someone to call me when they wanted me to call them and have a conversation. There's a damn camera that shows exactly what happened. And I blame myself for putting or establishing such a high bar that I only knew everyone was going to fail. Have you ever had a teacher that did that to you? I don't think I have, but it seems to make sense. Maybe you had a test, but you didn't have the right hints to nudge you in the right direction. Or you're so huffing and puffing that you ignored the sensations or the hints. It seems like at my age, I'm starting my lesson on tact. I got this acquaintance slash friend here camping out on my property. I'm about to rent out. I have to figure out how tactfully to tell him to get off. It's just a piece of dirt and he needed a place to park his RV. But the fact of the matter is I have an opportunity to rent it out and I have to stand my ground and be tactful when telling him he's got to go somewhere else. Another friend and I were out here a couple months ago setting up the fence. You'll be able to see some of those videos and shorts posted here of installing the fence posts. That friend, a different friend, has been out here on his own, and he's told me about some conversations with this person. There's a lack of maturity. He wants to bitch and moan about his own lack of success. All he's got to his name is a beat to shit RV and a beat to shit daily driver car. And he wants to feel sorry for himself. It doesn't mean it's my job to be an asshole. I deserve to kick him off. It is my land. It is now currently my life challenge to do it tactfully. I'm driving out here. I didn't have any books playing. I didn't have any music playing. Maybe that's why I have more to speak of right now. I've been thinking about these thoughts. And that's why I jumped on the phone to record. I've had so many thoughts just at the surface, which are often sort of deeper, that I felt the urge to record. I've upgraded the website, and I've spent some money doing that, and now I've spent some money on some hypnotherapy, and those first 2 sessions have been good. Yeah, I felt a little bummed that I missed out on tonight's session, but look, the worst that has already happened is that now I have to spend money on that extra session. That professional didn't lose out. She got paid, or is getting paid, or however that works. I don't know why I've catastrophized thoughts like that. It's not a big deal. It's more than a few dollars. And the irony is we were going to talk about money. but it's a relatively small amount. And I'm catastrophizing like I'm the reason someone's company failed. That wasn't mine. There's that catastrophization that I deal with regularly. I feel terribly guilty when something doesn't go perfectly. It's that people pleasing. It's that recognition. It's the when I say recognition, it's me recognizing that it's catastrophization. It's not that what I'm thinking is a failure is a very serious failure. They're very minor failures, if that. They're not even, if they could be construed as an insecurity. I mean, if I say I'll call someone later, and in my eyes, I call them a lot later, but maybe to them it's not a lot later. As long as I call them in the same day, it's later. I'll call you later this afternoon. Well, if we don't put a day, or if we don't put an hour on it, within a 4-hour window is probably reasonable. But I still feel guilty because maybe I'll intend on calling them in a half hour and then not call them for 3. And there's catastrophizing in those thoughts also. I've learned to stop and think. I just spoke of this, but basically recognize specifically if the thoughts I'm thinking are rational. Like this catastrophization is not rationalization. It's insecurity. It's worrying, which is awful for my health. If I continue to worry, that's going to be a huge detriment to my physical existence. I've made a boatload of mistakes, but now that I've taken a conscious effort at improving myself, I've recognized these insecurities of mine are thoughts I need to put in perspective. Occasionally I will forget to call someone. Then I end up calling them the following day. Maybe I say I call them in the afternoon and I forget, and it's too late and appropriate to call them after, say, 8 in the evening, so that I end up having to apologize the following day in the morning. Now, I know this has happened. Occasionally I feel really guilty because I'll realize they don't need me because they found someone else to handle the problem, and which is a non-issue in the grand scheme of things, but there's still a certain amount of guilt that I feel. It doesn't happen all the time, but what does always happen is that guilt when it happens. If I forget to call someone, that's the most obvious example. Those are the simple little mistakes that I make. Now, I make it my best effort to put it in the calendar. If I'm making an appointment for later in a day or later down the week. But the fact of the matter is, when these little menial mistakes happen, my mind amplifies them. And I have to learn not to. I make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. Generally, the mistakes I make are not harmful or hugely harmful to others. I even sometimes feel guilty when I can't fix a problem. Someone hires me to fix a problem. I might fix a problem, but it's not exactly what the wish list entailed. Maybe I had to give them a Band-Aid fix because they insisted I fix their old shit. Well, if you don't let me give you a new computer, you're going to have to deal with a Band-Aid on this computer. There's that. That people pleasing. That's something I've had to figure out and not allow or fix. And then, of course, there's that feeling or that sensation of what's that other phrase that the professionals call it? When you start to doubt your competency. And really, because I'm a technical professional, a lot of my competency is great. But I'm dealing with broken human beings that write the code, and the code is very broken. I think I've mentioned this weeks ago. A third of Microsoft's code is AI driven or written. And Microsoft has publicly admitted they've made a lot of mistakes in recent months. So you can imagine why an IT guy questions their own competency when the software and the hardware they're dealing with is its own flaw. What is it? What was I thinking? Yeah. Can you imagine a job? Maybe you're not in IT. You think you're supposed to have the answers, and you often do, but then because the software was glitching out, you weren't doing a damn thing wrong. That happens to me a lot. And it's not my fault, and that's not even part of my personal flaws. That's just like, what am I doing wrong? And then sometimes you just have to restart the computer, and sometimes that literally fixes the problem. You don't even know why restarting the computer fixed it. Obviously, something under the hood of that software got fixed. But those are the things that make me what I am. Imposter syndrome, that's the term I was trying to come up with. I know I've had imposter syndrome, and I think every IT professional has at some point. You're constantly questioning your own competency, and a lot of it is because the software you're working with is flawed. I deal with that all the time. Customers have to take my word for it when I tell them Microsoft Outlook is a pig, it's unreliable, and it's not your fault. Windows 11 is a pile of AI shit. It's not your fault. So anyway, I guess it's coming up on an hour now. I think this is the longest YouTube video I'll have spoken in. I suppose that goes to show how deep my mind is tonight. Words to think about: compassion, self-dignity, wisdom, knowing when to walk away, and knowing when to salvage a relationship. And think deep and hard about canceling relationships. Because even if they're not terribly deep, well, maybe they're not so deep to you, but you might be a better friend to someone than you realize. You might be the reason someone shows up to a social circle and not know it. When I ditched the social circle I mentioned earlier, these are thoughts I didn't think about when I chose not to return in a timely manner. I chose to come back literally a couple years later. So that means the narrative flipped because of my latency. My lack of returning in a timely manner meant words were said that can't be undone. And I'm pretty sure that there's regret on their end. I mean, quite frankly, if this other person I'm speaking of was more mature, they never would have lied and they never would have produced a second narrative. In which case, I would have been allowed to come back. I'm not allowed back now because the narrative is such that's conflicting with what my narrative is. So you've already got two narratives and mine isn't included. I was ignorant in not showing up in a timely manner. They were ignorant and fibbing about what happened. Now we've got friendships that can't continue because there's no way in hell his level of maturity is going to get to be where he can admit to what he did or said. Yeah, I lied. Chris didn't start that fight. That's not the sort of level of integrity we're dealing with. Maybe that's ignorant of me to say, but I think it would be pretty damn awkward for me to return. And that's why I understand I'm not welcome there. Even if I was to be the wise one and say, hey, let's have a chat. Things have been said. Bells have been rung. So that's why out here in darkness where there are no city lights, well, there's a main drag a mile from here. But as I walk down the street in front of my property, pitch black. That sort of darkness allows me to think clearly about what I've just spoken. I've just given you an hour out of my day. And these are the thoughts that are a preview to what I think of fairly often. At this point, well, in a way, talking to the camera is its own therapy. If I'm willing to upload content unedited, maybe I'm not insane. When you hear yourself speak out loud, it does add to the thought, to the quality. Because if you never speak out loud and you just have thoughts that you question them more, because when you hear them out loud, they're easier to comprehend. If you don't hear your thoughts out loud, they change silently. They change in your mind. They don't once they're said. Once you say them out loud, You can correct yourself because you recognize it to be not what you were thinking. But if you said it, it's the thought. Where if you don't say it out loud, you're not sure if you're thinking a complete thought. If you say an incomplete thought out loud, you know it's an incomplete thought. I'm anticipating productivity tomorrow. I'm going to finish up not finish up. I'm going to add some more fence posts because I was a little too conservative in placing the ones at the front of the property. I'm going to move some of them further out, and that means I'm going to add to the sides. And then I have a gun that I bought a couple weeks ago, which I haven't had a chance to fire. So I'll play with that later. Not tonight, but I mean tomorrow or maybe Sunday. But that's where I am. That's the other thing I like to do when I'm out here, because I don't like those overly controlled environments with the refrigerated shooting ranges and all that racket, all that noise from other guns, which you can't predict because you're not the one pulling the trigger. I like being out in the middle of nowhere where I don't have to bother about not hurting anyone or not being bombarded with other people's shooting. It's peaceful out here. But anyway, I'm ready for bed. I didn't anticipate being on camera for a whole hour. Anyway, if you like hearing what I talk about, subscribe and don't be shy. Go ahead and comment. I'm curious what you think of me, genuinely speaking. Have a good night.